Hi, I'm Monica Daniel. I was an editor for 10 years in all sorts of shows before I transitioned into scripted television as an assistant editor, currently trying to work my way back up to officially editing. My latest project that I worked on was a Netflix show called Altered Carbon, which is going to come out next year. And I was really excited about this panel when Michael announced it. And then when he actually asked me to moderate it, I went full fangirl. I was super excited. So first, I'm actually going to have these guys introduce themselves, because who knows them better than themselves? You guys got 30 seconds. It's like, you know, pop quiz game show. 30 seconds. Highlight reel. Who are you? Here's Kevin Ross, Ace.
Hello, thanks. I'm Kevin Ross. I got my first assisting gig where I got paid on Kickboxer 2.
Great movie.
I got to do editing in my first theatrical film was The Lawnmower Man. my first union gig was Mrs. Doubtfire. And I finally moved up to editor on a movie called 100 Girls, which was a small one, and then I transitioned into television, and I've been cutting television for the last 15 years. And did Stranger Things seasons 1 and 2, and I'm currently cutting on X-Files. Oh, and if you're a member of Editors Guild, I'm one of your board representatives. So contact me if you need anything. Okay.
All right, next we have Nat Fuller. 30 seconds, go.
Hi, I'm Nat Fuller. I am one of the editors on Stranger Things 2. I came on as an assistant editor for Stranger Things 1 with Dean Zimmerman, and they bumped me up to editor on 2, so here we are.
All right. And next we have Katheryn Naranjo.
Hi, my name's Kat. I go by Kat Naranjo. I started off as an intern and worked my way up in post-production on various TV shows. And I started last year on Stranger Things 1 as assistant editor. And this season, Stranger Things 2 as an assistant editor, and I edited episode 207.
Nicely done. And last but not least, Casey Cichocki, who has a very difficult last name to pronounce.
Yeah, that's great pronunciation.
Yes.
My name's Casey Cichocki. My first film that I worked on was Red 2. Then went on to work on a few more Sean Levy films along the way before post-production coordinator on season 1 of Stranger Things, and then assisted Nat Fuller here on season 2. And I'm working with Kevin on X-Files now.
Actually, Casey, let's check your mic. How many of you guys have seen Stranger Things season 2? All right. How many of you haven't? All right, look, I'm sorry to break it to you, but spoiler alert. All right? Why haven't you watched it yet? There's only 9 episodes. Come on, guys. All right, to start off, we're going to show a quick clip.
Hey guys, do you see the... Will! Are you okay?
Nothing's gonna go back to the way that it was. Not really.
I saw something. What is it? I don't know. I felt it everywhere.
Darkness falls across the land. The midnight hour is close at hand. Creatures crawl in search of blood to terrorize y'all's neighborhood. And whosoever shall be found.
Sometimes I feel like I still see her.
But must stand and face the hounds of hell and rot inside a corpse's shell.
Whatever is happening is spreading from this place.
What does it want? Not me. Everyone else. Will! Wake up! Abort! Abort! If you're out there, just please give me a sign.
For those of you who haven't seen the second season yet, your homework assignment is to go home after this and binge it all night. All right. Pardon me, I might be coughing a little bit. Yeah, we got our little mascot, 11 here, courtesy of my son. So why don't we get started? Working on a Netflix show, you know, I noticed it was a little different than working. I usually work in just regular television shows, and it's a little different working on a Netflix show versus working on your standard like TV show or feature. It's kind of a combination of the two. Can you guys talk about how kind of the differences, workflows, and general approaches, like the fact that you deliver all 10 episodes at once, so you're not necessarily working up against individual air dates?
Well, that's true, and it was different than most television series I've worked on before, where we actually did have an extended amount of time to do our cuts. And also because the Duffer Brothers were in Atlanta shooting, and for season 2 at least, we were back in LA cutting. We would get our dailies and we would have our cuts possibly ready to go, but they wouldn't be here to look at the cuts right away. So it extended our post schedule a little bit, which was a nice change of pace compared to when you're on a television series and they shoot for 8 days, and then you have 3 days to do your editor's cut, and then you're right in with the director for their 4 days, and then you finish and send it to the studio. The studio has 2 days to make their cuts, and it's just like an assembly line. You move on, and as soon as you've done that process, you're back onto your next episode. This had season 2, we did what's called cross-boarding, which we would do 2 episodes at a time, and so some days the dailies would be mine, sometimes the dailies would be Nat's, because we would split up. I'd do episode 1, he'd do episode 2, and we'd break it up that way. Some days we get, equal amount of dailies, but it ended up that we'd have 23, 24 days of shooting for those 2 episodes. So it gave us time to work on, like Kat did amazing sound design on my episodes and really fill them out, so before the Duffers ever saw them, they were in really great shape going forward.
Yeah, and it was funny the way that would work, because sometimes Kevin would get totally bombarded with just weeks of dailies, and I'm sitting there on my couch like, oh, this is great.
Did you bring your Switch to work?
No, but I did bring my PlayStation 1. Yeah, PlayStation 4. I didn't have a Switch at that time yet. But it would be kind of funny because Kevin would stick his head and be like, oh my God, and he'd be like, it's coming back around. I'm like, I know. And then it would come back around, and I would just get slammed for 2 weeks straight of just eight dailies, and Kevin was able to catch up and do or maybe take a little bit of a breather. So that was a little different.
And how did they do the cross-boarding? I know first season it was about 21 days for 2 episodes at a time. Did they keep kind of that schedule of 21 days of shooting to split across 2 episodes?
For season 1 and season 2, because it was more ambitious with visual effects, and we had a visual effects crew on set every day doing a lot of the visual effects, plates and things. They extended the schedule, I think, 23 days. Yeah, it was about that. But what was exciting about this show, for season 1, Casey wasn't on the show yet, but Kat and Nat and Dean and myself, we all got to go to Atlanta and be on location for the first 2 months. because I think Netflix wanted to make sure the Duffers were going to hand in good episodes. They didn't know these guys yet, and so they were worried, and we had to have the first 2 episodes edited by Christmas so they could review them over the Christmas break and make sure everything was going well. And then we came back and we cut everything else in Los Angeles. And this season we didn't get to go to Atlanta, but that was kind of fun to go on location on a TV show. That just doesn't happen.
I don't miss Atlanta.
Oh, you don't miss Atlanta.
That is.
How early did you guys get the scripts to read? The production, there's several drafts, and usually the production draft is the widely distributed draft. Did you guys get that usually right before you got Dailies, or do you have a little bit of time to kind of process the story arc?
Well, it was different for the first couple because we got the first 2 before they started shooting the first 2, so we can kind of start seeing it. Maybe even 3 up to 4. And then after that, the guys had to still continue to write for, the 5, 6, and 7, and 8. So we weren't seeing those until they were closer to being in production, those episodes. Mm-hmm. So we were kind of like we were kind of like in suspense too. We were like, oh, what's going to happen after episode 4? Because we didn't know, and then they would come out and we'd be like, oh, okay, now I know.
And I'm going to ask this because this is something that has happened to me on several occasions that was not fun. Sometimes when, scenes are intercut, there's something happening in 2 different locations, but you have to cut them together to get the flow. Was there a lot where they shot one half of the scene early on and then they shot the latter half or the other side of the scene, backloading the kind of crazy action scenes later where you kind of had to go up against the gun and now you had to try to integrate everything together?
A little bit, but it wasn't up against the gun like it is on network television, so we had time. The last week or 2 of the show, the last couple of weeks were basically all of episode 9, which was everything in the rift, and that was all green screen, and trying to put that together in bits and pieces, and then the winter ball at the end, the snowball. And that was the end, and that was the end of my last episode, so trying to get that all cut before the Duffers got back and ready to go. But then it's also interesting because then if I'm still cutting, they'll come back and go, okay, well, we'll just go in and work with Nat on 8. And they would do that while I finished 9, or if they came in here, then Nat could go and make his changes on 8. So I never felt on this show we were hard-pressed to have a deadline, really.
Let's talk a little bit about, because you mentioned a little bit about the visual effects elements. I forgot to ask, how many people here work in scripted? And just work in, everyone else just works in other things. How many editors do we have here? Assistant editors? Producers, directors? Anything else? Okay, random, there you go. Okay, so we have a lot of people. So if there's any terms we use that are specific to working in scripted projects, please just ask out loud so we could explain it. Sometimes we forget, what people who don't work in scripted know, because it's day to day for us, and we don't realize, oh, we actually need to define that term. Crossboarding. So crossboarding is one, usually on shows, they just shoot 1 episode at a time, 8 to 10 days in a row. When it's crossboarding, they might shoot episode 1 on day 1, then episode 2 on day 2, and then half and half on day 3. So they're going back and forth between the episodes. And so that's what it means to crossboard. They're shooting more than 1 episode at the same time.
I was going to say about the way crossboarding worked for our situation is we worked in blocks, so we would do episodes 1 and 2 in a certain amount of time, so that we would have, our 23 days would be episodes 1 and 2. So again, one day would be, half of episode 1, half of episode 2. Some days it might be episode 2 heavy, episode 1 heavy, but then we would work, and the next block would be 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and then 7 was kind of its own thing, and then 8 and 9.
Kat and Kevin can probably speak about this a little bit more, but it seemed like the only outlier was the top of 1. Wasn't shot until episode 7. Oh, so they were wrapped up with episode 1, and then that just kind of sat in a position without that opening sequence up until 2 or 3 months later when 7 was shooting.
Absolutely. And the reason for crossboarding is for the ease of production. They have to go to the same location. They have 2 scripts ready, and they may be at Joyce Byers' house in the exterior. And instead of having to go there for episode 1 and then schedule it 3 weeks later for episode 2, they can shoot all the scenes for both episodes while they're at that location. And that's mainly why you crossboard, is that you can take care of locations for multiple episodes at one time.
So are you guys editing both episodes at the same time as well?
Yes.
Excuse me. So let's talk, the visual effects plates. So do you guys, as editors, do your own temps, or do you have the assistant editors do them, or are you pushing them over to, I know you had a visual effects editorial department. Like, how complete do you have your temp visual effects done for your green screens, for random shot elements, for giant mind flayer monsters?
I think Kevin makes the best mind flayer monster that I've ever seen. It was like a drawn air balloon.
I'll brag for a second, because we use Avid. We were using the Avid on the system, but I used the paint tool and animated it in with, I animated actually with a black second layer for when Will is running down the hallway and the shadow monster is chasing him. I decided, as my goofy temp, I was going to animate these like arms coming at him, these black arms. And then the Duffers actually liked it, so they kind of, I don't think that was actually planned originally, but then when visual effects took over, they added these, obviously they were a lot better than my crappy animat, but the idea, the spirit was still there. So I was happy that was part of it. As far as the plates, it just depended on what you were trying to do. For the rift scene in 9, if you've seen the episode, it's when Elle has to close the rift. All I had were storyboards, and Kat brought all the storyboards in from visual effects department. They had storyboarded the whole sequence. And then I basically tried to cut with the storyboards where if Hopper is shooting at something from that cage that's dangling, I would put in the background, I'd burn in the storyboard of the demo dog just trying to get into the cage. That was one of those situations where it really was the hand-drawn storyboards that were left in there for quite some time until we started getting the actual visual effects pieces. But we did have and sometimes I'd say, Kat, you got to fix this for me. And so she would go and do amazing like burn-ins and all sorts of stuff. And Casey, I'm sure, does the same thing for Nat.
Yeah, Casey's the master at comps. And
Well, talk about one of your favorite temp visual effects that you did.
Oh.
Where you're just like, man, I got to clean up this mess that he made.
I didn't do, what I was most proud of this season was Kevin wanted me to bring in the storyboard for the car chase in episode 1. And I thought
Which was the opening.
The opening of
the
episode
opening of the
1.
season.
And I thought I'd be like overly ambitious and like make it, like a flip book. I was trying to make it animated and make it move. I added music and sound effects so that it wasn't just like missing scene. It was like a cool little storyboard. So I had a lot of fun with that.
Oh, and it was awesome. What she did was she like animated between 2 storyboards so that when Aid is snapping her fingers, you saw that. But she added music that when the Duffers, we cut it in. I was like, this is perfect, Kat. Let's just stick this on the head of episode 1 until it's, they shoot the Pittsburgh scene. And the Duffers were like, oh my God, Kat, where'd you pick this music? This is the perfect music we wanted to use for this scene. So it just worked out really well.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, of course, the storyboards, I'll say, it was a guy. It was like the lost brother, but then, early after the storyboards are done, they changed it to the lost sister. I think the original titles, when they released the titles for season 2, 8 was going to be a guy, but then they decided earlier on to change that to a girl.
What about you, Casey? Is there a temp visual effect that you were particularly proud of?
Well, I think one of my biggest compliments was Nat said that I had animated the demo dogs to level of PS1 graphics. So there's a little section where the sprinklers come on and the demo dog hears it and runs away, and I think I did a pretty good job getting them to run out of there. But otherwise, it was the monitor comps in episode 8 on top of monitor comps. So I spent probably an entire month just comping monitors. So
Yeah.
How much swearing was going on in your office?
on the trickier ones with tracking, probably plenty.
Yeah, and all this is done just for editor's cut, just to sell the cut to the directors and producers. This is not for final release. This is all just for internal eyes only. So a lot of work goes into selling your cut.
Well, we did have a visual effects department in-house for us, which was actually really nice. It kind of took the onus off us to make a really polished thing. And Casey will tell you, I'm kind of like, just make it look like it's there and it like fills the time. So because what we would do is we would use some like turntables of the demo dogs and pause it, cut it out, and then use it as kind of like a little walking down the hallways. But then I would go down and talk to the VFX guys and be like, okay, like this is obviously almost final, but can you just make it a little bit better? And then they would know exactly what to do.
We'll talk a little bit about working with the VFX department, because a lot of shows, more and more shows nowadays need visual effects departments. It's just so many VFX go into shows now. The budgets are getting a little bigger sometimes. So how many people were in the VFX department to support you?
Well, we had a VFX editor, Matt Carson, and he had 2 assistants. And then we had the VFX supervisor, the VFX producer, 2 coordinators, and a concept artist there.
So how was that workflow going back and forth as, they got more, pre-comps and renders and just, previs stuff to hand you guys for editorial, and how involved were you later on when they're doing their visual effects spotting sessions to kind of see? Sometimes visual effects spotting happens when you watch down the episodes and then you discuss with everyone what needs to happen, what can't happen, what's going to be admitted because there's no budget for it. And sometimes that actually does change the cut as you're going through these sessions. So talk a little bit about, working through that process, just integrating a show with such great VFX in it.
Well, this year was much, much bigger than last year's visual effects department. Visual effects department last year was like me. I mean, basically, like I was kind of organizing it. We had a smaller team. There was a coordinator and a post soup. And we didn't have as many shots, like our episodes, the shots in like the first 30 seconds of episode 1 was like as much as episode 4 in season 1. So, it was much more manageable last year, but it also was something that I was doing as an assistant, which, wasn't my favorite task. But this year, like Kat said, there was this whole team that was there to kind of make sure that the visual effects were going. And it was more or less kind of like on a feature where it's a little bit more separate, where the visual effects, Matt Carson, our VFX editor, is doing the pulls, and then the coordinators are dealing with all the vendors, and then there would be VFX reviews where the guys and everyone would kind of come in, and that's where Kevin and I would come in and sit with them, and sometimes they would be so long, the reviews, that we would, Kevin would be like, Nat, you're up, and then for my episode. And then he'd leave and I'd come in. Otherwise, you're sitting there for hours.
Are you talking like 4 hours?
Yeah.
Literally 4 hours
Yes.
sometimes.
Because it's just the scope of the visual effects work was so much larger. And I think it was a shock almost to everyone. I think the Duffer Brothers were not very used to that, and just the amount of time. And it would be sometimes a little frustrating for us because we're like, yo, we want to cut, let's go. But it's like, oh, we have to do a visual effects review. And you kind of have to weigh, like, yes, visual effects are very important for the episode, but also at the same time, we're like, we want to cut too. We want to get you guys the scene so you guys can.
And I was going to say, there's a lot of visual effects that you wouldn't know. I mean, yes, there's the dogs and the CGI monsters and stuff, but then there's little things that, like, they're going to change like, for some reason, I think on set one time they shot with the wrong piece of paper with the shadow monster, Will's shadow. So they had to replace that with do a visual effect to put the correct one into the shot. And so you have little things you wouldn't even think about, or maybe like the changing a photo in a flyer. Yeah. So, but also every shot you see where there's those little white spores, that's all visual effects. Every one of those, and those are 3D spores that light when a flashlight goes by. And I mean, those took forever to get right.
Did you, and the spores are when kind of the upside down is, you're kind of in the upside down world. Were there any times where you were going through visual effects and you realized, okay, I'm going to have to recut the scene a little bit because the budget wasn't there for the amount of visual effects shots there were?
I don't think it was budget-wise. It was more of, picture-wise. Like I remember we got, so the scene in episode 2 where Will first sees the shadow monster rise up. We cut that basically with a plate, an empty plate. I did my little mine was the Nintendo version. It wasn't even PS1 yet. But so we did that, and then they actually, what the VFX team did, which is a great move, is they gave us an entire spread, or entire shot of that, because what we had done in our editor's cuts, we cut to Will reacting, we cut back to the monster, we cut to Will. They just gave us a whole big piece. They were like, we're just going to animate this, or we're going to make a visual effect of this monster going all the way up and all the way down. And so then when we saw it, we were like, oh, okay, so like that move is really cool, and that will allow us to go back and like recut the scene. And that was something that the visual effects did kind of inform how we were going to cut. But most of the time, usually, there's certain things like that where like if the visual effect, like the way it came in animated, you're like, oh, it's okay, we'll just trim this and trim that.
Take 3 frames off the tail.
Yeah, that's no big deal.
Well, now I kind of want to talk other end of the table, guys, the assistant editors, because, there's the idea that people think assistant editors are all technical, and there's a lot of technical aspects to the job, but there's also a lot of creative input the assistants put into the job. Depending on the editor you work with, you may be doing music, you may be unofficially cutting scenes, don't tell the union. You may be giving feedback on scenes and creating temp visual effects that inform the cut. And also sound design. I read an interview, Kevin, that you said you spent in first season, you spent as much time refining that sound design as you did on picture. And a lot of time that falls to the assistants or a combination of assistants working with the editors and tweaking that. So if you guys could talk about the sound design, and Katheryn, you were kind of able to probably steal from yourself from first season.
Yeah.
Stealing from yourself is fantastic.
Yeah, I remember
When there's
I did
previous
this.
seasons.
Yeah.
And Casey, you were coming in for the first time. So talk about your approach, because there's so much sound design in these scenes, the sound of the upside down, the sound of the monsters. Spoiler alert, there's the whole scene when 11 is reintroduced back to the boys, and you just see everyone in the house, and all you hear is her kicking the demo dog's ass, and it was fantastic. And it was all in sound, and it was fantastic, and I loved it, and I'm sure it saved a bunch of money on visual effects. So talk about just, approaching the sound work, and, did you pull from first season? Did you steal from final mixes from first season? Just like that whole process.
Right, yeah. So one of the first things we did when we had a little downtime at the beginning, I think we had about a week and a half before they started shooting, we basically asked for the stems from first season, and then we also went through those and kind of plucked out all those signature sounds and everything that the guys from the sound supervisors and all of them had done previously. So we had a nice little bank of what we could pull from, and then also with the ambient tracks and all that stuff. So we had a guide essentially of kind of the direction to take it. And what was great about working with Nat is he was pretty apt to cut a scene and then kind of toss it my way and let me kind of build it out sound-wise. And I'd start with just the ambient to get a feel and then kind of just go crazy. And that's the motto from the guys is bigger is generally better, almost always. So if you think it's too loud, it's probably not loud enough. And just that whole Edgar Wright-esque, large transitions and all that stuff was really fun to do.
So describe this large transitions, because if people can't remember, not everyone here is as familiar with the show as you are. So what were these transitions? What did they sound like?
So it's things as simple as, a phone being hung up back onto the receiver. It's not just a click. It's a huge bang, which kind of rings out into the start of the next scene. Or I guess an example would be when Hopper's talking to Eugene in the police station. I believe it's episode 2, right around scene 40. Well, towards the end of the scene, Hopper's taking down his info, and the last thing he does, not super memorable, but he slams in his little cabinet drawer, and that rings out all the way through Max skating up to Billy at the car. So a lot of deverb and a lot of ring outs for sure.
And what about you, Kat? What's some of the sound design you really enjoyed and were like, I'm proud of this, before the mixer just completely changed it?
I know. I mean, we're too, but I sometimes I'm like, why is that not, where's the boom? It's so low. I spent all this time making it as loud as it could be. And now it's like,
Yeah, it's sometimes
what?
painful to go to mixed playback, but most times I'm like, wow, you're way better with sound than I am.
Yeah, no. You definitely have the mindset of like, they're going to come in and fix it. But it's fun. I mean, like you said, when you're an assistant, you're not an editor. So one of the times you can be creative is sound design. And Kevin's the best. He just gives me things and like, go ahead, make this sound good. And I love movies and I love horror movies. So to be able to, add these, little whispers or like, big slamming like roars. I really liked the hallway scene in episode 3 when Will is running from the shadow monster, and then he runs out to the field, and it's like he's yelling, "Go away!" I had these like really big booms in there that I thought really worked. It was cool until the sound design, but it was. I know I love doing sound. It's great. It's your time to shine when you're an assistant.
And I knew Kat was going to do that because we had worked on the same series before Stranger Things, but she worked for another editor, and that was *Halt and Catch Fire*, that she did great sound design on. And then when we were in Atlanta, and the first scene I gave her, I was like, Kat, will you put some sound to this? And when it came back, I was like, oh my God, you just made me look really good. This is wonderful. And
Just maybe add some ambience,
just
like
make
a
it good.
sound.
And it worked out really well. And then talking about like the booms this season, last season in one, Kat came up with a great design for the Christmas lights down the hallway when Holly is following her that we got. And if you don't know what mixed playback means, that's after we hand off picture lock, we send it out to the sound department, and they add all the sound. They do their own sound design. They fix all the tracks. Oh, and then we come and review what they've done for the final mix, and we get to give notes before Netflix comes in. And the Duffers give their notes, and they'll say, Kat, Nat, you guys have anything? And then you'll say, okay, at 23 minutes, I heard a weird boom in the track, and then they fix those little things. That's what we do then. But we see it for the first time with their sound design, and Kat had these wonderful little light ding, ding, dings, and they put in these screechy sounds that we were like, oh, put back the temp. But
They love hearing that.
Oh, they hate hearing that. Never, you don't want that. Otherwise, it's always good. It's just those once in a while you fall in love with temp. You have temp love.
Otherwise, the highest praise that you can receive is the brothers being on the stage saying, put it back to how it was.
Yeah. You're like, oh, yes.
Go back to the guy.
Did you guys, because Netflix kind of likes to future-proof, did you guys get to do mixed playback in Dolby Atmos?
I don't think so.
No.
Oh, okay. I did.
No, but we
It was really cool.
But no, correct me if I'm wrong, but this season we shot 8K.
Yes.
And
8K?
and then did 6K. We finished in 6K, right? I believe so.
So I know first season they shot 6K, and you got the
And we did 4K.
center cut of the 4K composition. So you got the 6K composition.
Mm-hmm.
So it
Yeah.
gave you a lot of room to play with then.
Yeah.
Did you guys often find yourselves going back to the Dailies house and asking for the full picture of the 8K?
Not well.
It happened. There's a few times maybe with like stabilization shots or shots that Nat wanted to tweak or whatever. We'd basically pull the full 8K, just the low res of it, and we'd plug it in there and then just make sure that.
We had one. We had it a couple of times, but one of them was in the last pullback crane shot in 9. When you see Snowball, and it's the wide shot, if you've seen the episode, it's the last shot before you go outside for the spin into the upside down. we were pulling back and we couldn't see the S and the L. It was like we weren't wide enough. And so we were like, well, let's just go to the 8K. And then sure enough, they had the full frame in 8K, so we used that. Excuse me. It must be because I'm sitting next to you and you're sick.
Sorry, I got cooties.
Oh, I'm
Sorry.
I'm next.
I'm kidding.
So, for you two, about the editing, first season shows are usually kind of tricky because you're trying to figure out the style and tone of the show, and there's usually a lot of experimentation. How was it? Was it different coming to second season now that that style kind of has been set? There was less guesswork in trying to figure out, okay, will this be cool? Is this what they want?
No. I never. I mean, we always got to experiment with whatever dailies we had, and I don't think we ever thought of it as we set a style in season one. As Dean Zimmerman and I had mentioned, after we had finished season one, we found it was odd that we actually liked it. The fact that we actually had the same sense of style or the same rhythm or pace, and we felt like you couldn't tell our episodes apart, and that was a compliment to, I guess, the Duffers putting us together in the same crew, because we just approached the material the same way. We didn't have some style that was going to stand out from one episode to the other. And that's how we approached season two, whatever worked.
Okay, and let's talk about the music, because I know you kind of had a unique way of putting the music together for season one. You guys just got a bunch of tracks from, what was the name of the band? Survive. And you worked with them back and forth to put it together. For season two, were you able to just pull from the season one library, or there still a lot of just like trying to layer tracks on top of each other to get it to work?
Well, it did. At first, that's what my first instinct was to go to those. I'm like, okay, so let's pull in the soundtrack, make sure we have that. And then you would put that in the scene, and then for some reason it would kind of feel stale, because it was used before. There were times in season two where a track from season one would work very well with your scene. And so what I would do is I would cut the scene, and then I would just kind of just listen to season one and be like, oh, this kind of sounds like it, and then put it in. But then a lot of the times, the brothers or Sean would just be like, oh, this doesn't, we don't like this. So then you would go to maybe a temp track. And the brothers are very, very, very good with their music choices. Like, they do things you just would never even think of. So what I would like to do is I would put in my options and then just kind of let them tear it apart and put in their options.
All right. Now let's go down the line here, and we'll start with Casey. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Sure.
What's maybe a scene that posed unique challenges for you in some aspect?
Well, unique challenges, I guess, on the assisting side.
Could be sound, could be music, could be visual effects, could be
I guess,
really, really big bin with a million setups.
Yeah, once you start getting into like the double A's and the A, B, and scene setups, it's going to be a long day of dailies. But as far as scenes, I think could have been maybe the ending of 8 before 11, I guess, meets or sees Mike for the first time in the second season. The brothers had a distinct idea of what they wanted the sound to be like when the demo dogs are being killed outside the buyer's house. And what's great is they're super specific. They give a pretty clear roadmap of kind of the sounds they want to hear. And they wanted really specific deaths for the demo dogs. They wanted to hear rustling in bushes, kind of like a lapping around the house with distinct, footsteps and stuff like that. And then individual deaths of dogs without knowing kind of what's happening to them. But after a few revisions, we got to the end, and there were some claps, and they said, this is it, you got it. So
Nice. And that is one of my favorite scenes. So badass. Kat, how about you?
As an assistant, I had trouble, I'll do both. I had trouble with, at the Rift, the Duffers liked shooting in slow-mo so that they could speed it up into real time. So I had a giant bin of slow-mo things that I had to retime every single one of them and group them.
That's basically, she's making it play like a normal clip.
Yeah, it would be in
So it's
like
double the
72
amount
frames.
of footage.
Yeah, so that one sucked. As when I edited 7, The train sequence was a little difficult for me. There's not a lot of coverage of 11 and Collie, so I had to make a few shots with animats from different takes to get them talking to each other and then bringing the train in and the flashbacks. So I think that was a little tricky.
Mine is definitely the very, very first scene that I was given to cut. I think partially because it was my first time being, in the editor's chair on a show such as this, so I was a little nervous about that. But then I think it was a combination of many things. It was the first scene that they shot for episode 2, and it was the scene between Hopper and Joyce when they're talking about what they want to do with Will. Will's had another episode, and it was, I think it was just very challenging because I feel like the actors were trying to get some rust off. There was a lot of continuity, like hands in the wrong places during certain lines, and just it was day one of the whole thing, and I'm like, all right, let's go, and then I'm like, oh no, I'm like, this sucks.
Did you ever find yourself yelling, "Put your goddamn arm down"?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, more than a few calls to the script sheet.
Yeah. So, but it was good because it kind of got me into the set, and it was also a very important scene because it was like Joyce, and it was like a 3-minute long scene, and it had, it was like very serious, and then it comes back down, and they have a moment of levity, and then it comes back and it goes back to serious, and it was just a lot of that kind of finesse work, and that coupled with the problems. Of day one shooting, getting the rust off, but I think it turned out great. It turned out to be a nice little scene, and I'm really happy with it.
All right.
For me, it'd be the 15 minutes in episode 9 when they're in the tunnels, and while Elle is trying to close the rift. It was so much footage and just trying to work that out. And once she starts to close the rift, when do we use the flashbacks? And the adding of using Brenner in the end where Elle was seeing that wasn't originally scripted. We added those like the last week. We were like, oh, wait a minute, what if we put Brenner in here and made him part of this? And they're just quick flash cuts, but it's just trying to get the timing of all that. That was the biggest obstacle to work on. It just took the most time.
All right, we're going to open up for Q&A right now. Let's questions. Oh, boy. Everyone's raising their hand.
We're going to do the same thing that we did with Billy, and if we can make this thing work.
What did you do?
Does it work? Yeah. It works? Yeah. All right.
So you want people to line up?
Bring this over here. So line up and ask your questions. And we only have about 15 minutes.
All right.
So no follow-up questions, just the questions.
And if you guys can try to keep it as concise as possible so we could get as many questions in as possible, we'd be very grateful for that. All right, go ahead, Jason.
So I know there was a ton of homage in the entire season. Did you guys ever feel like you were trying to force an homage in there, that you really had to manhandle it to get it to fit in there, or did it really fit in there pretty naturally?
I'll try to answer that. Personally, we never were consciously understanding what the homage was at that time. Like we were never saying, I had the bus scene, the van flip over the kids, and I said, okay, this is the E.T. moment. But we never tried to mimic any type of homage to 80s movies. It's just, I think that was just the outgrowth of what the material was. So, people like to talk about, here's the Goonies moment and stuff. We weren't trying to do that in the cutting room.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks for coming. 2 technical questions. Where did you do your storyboard? You say you brought them in. What software was that? And then when you got the stems from the previous season, when I've worked with stems, I find, what was your process for receiving it, organizing it? How did it come to you in a bin? How did you categorize it so that you could work with it and break it down to stems? Sorry, 2 very different questions.
I'll handle the storyboard. Okay. So for the storyboards, it was essentially just a PDF actually that we'd get, and then we would just kind of take like crops of each little image and then just bring them in as images. So that was pretty simple. And as far as the stims, we would basically just get the 5 ones from the sound supervisor's assistants or the sound assistants, and they were labeled with what they were. And so as far as breaking them out, it was essentially easy just with them being labeled. We kind of had an idea of where stuff lived from the last season, so we could kind of direct ourselves to it and then go to that specific track, whether it was a practical effect or a sound effect or something like that.
By the time it was, not by the name on the clip. It was broken down by where it was on the list.
Yeah, and so we would get those and we'd line them up with the final ProReses from season 1, so we could use like a visual image to kind of go where we needed to.
Hello. I have a question for everybody. It's kind of a question that Monica posted on a forum. What do you guys, for the editors, what do you guys look for in a person to mentor, and then the assistants that leveled up to being editors, what do you look for in a mentor?
Well, Casey definitely has been, a perfect person to bring up. We worked together when I was an assistant, and he was, he was a PA and a coordinator. So we've always we kind of came up together in a sense, where even before he was an assistant editor, I was kind of showing him like how things work in the cutting room. Like, this is what you do when we're doing visual effects, and then for him to come into season 2 as an assistant editor, he just soaked up everything that I had learned as an assistant and everything that I wanted to do as an editor. He was, he took it on, and he learned very quickly. And anytime that I would just shoot him stuff to do, and he would come back and give killer work. And if I ever needed to give him any criticism, he would take it and like a champ and learn from any mistakes that he was making, which is super important for when you're learning and when you're coming up. You will make mistakes, and you can't let them get you down. You just got to keep trucking and learn from it, and it's not the end of the world. So.
Hey guys, thanks for doing everything that you do. It's very inspiring. I study your transitions, your use with extensive sound design, and I say this as your biggest fan, but the biggest thing that drove me nuts in season 2, and I want to know where this came from, and if it was an edict from the brothers, or if the sound department was like, oh, that would be groovy to do that, is every time a flashlight shined across the screen, we were hearing something that accompanied the movement. And in a series that's so hyper real and just lush, that took me out of the moment. And season 2 is flawless, by the way. So I say that lightly and with caution. Can you tell me where that came from? Was that?
That was all the Duffer.
No.
I love that.
They loved it. On the
every time there's a flashlight whoosh, put it.
Yeah.
Put my,
On the mix stage, you hear him say, "No, you forgot to add the swish to that
It
light."
felt like that, where it's like, no, that one, because it was like the most minute detail, like Hopper's going, no, and it's like the swing matched the movement. It was just like,
It's the Michael Jackson effect. Haven't you ever seen his little dance moves with sound effects?
That's it.
I think we stole it from season 1 and we're just copy pasting.
Yeah, they were definitely lighter in season 1, and then even down to 11, dropping her little head down and looking under the baseboards in the cabin. The lightest little whoosh.
Oh, it was in season 1?
Yeah.
But not so prevalent.
It was
I
subtle.
think it started like in 5 when
Yeah.
Hopper's going to Hawkins. He breaks in. I think that's one of the first places that really started getting like.
Everything else is amazing.
It'll be in 3. Just be ready. Just be ready.
Just so you know, I was so into the story, I didn't notice the flashlight whooshes.
Now you will.
I'll be like, oh, cool. It'll be like a lightsaber. Zoom.
Oh, you'll never unhear it. It's there.
So this is kind of a follow-up question to his question. How involved are the Duffer Brothers in the actual edit, or how hands-on are they? Because I know some directors are on or off. And which do you guys prefer? And do they ever have creative disagreements? And how do you guys handle that?
They're very hands-on. I mean, they don't stop us when we're doing our cut, but then they want to go and review. They'll say, let's look at all the other takes just to view them, and then make sure you've got the right one in. I mean, they're very thorough. And, you know, as an editor, sometimes you want to go, oh, I cut it right the first time. But you know that that's not the case. The more experience you have and, you know, don't have an attitude about it, just do what they want and see what comes of it. And things get changed, and sometimes they stay the same. I mean, but it's just, you know, it's a process. And they have such great ideas, you just go with them.
And they always agree on all those ideas?
The two of them against, you mean with each other? Or with, sometimes they disagree. And then they go and they talk it out, and then they come back and make their decision. But yeah, they'll have opposite opinions sometimes, sure.
Hi, Chuy Rosales, fellow assistant editor. Can you guys talk, assistant editors, can you guys talk about how that transition to editing, how the executive producers were like, hey, can you cut episode 207, or how did they decide to bring you on? Just that experience, that transition, how did you prepare for it, and how did you put yourself on the spot to be able to do it?
Kevin is the best. He put me up. He put it in their head, the idea. And they asked me one day, they said that we thought about this and we want you to cut 207, which was amazing. Mentally preparing, I read the script, I read the direction they wanted to go, and just was like, I gotta do what they, I gotta be there all night, every day, just trying to make a good cut.
And I would say there was a joke about don't let the union hear the assistants are cutting. Well, we've had that discussion in board meetings, actually, but it's not a problem, and I'm from this feeling that as an editor, it's my job to help the assistant become an editor if they want to do that. There are some assistants who want to be career assistants, and that's fine, but the ones who want to become editors, how do you have that chance? When I started out, it was on film, and the editor would say, would you like to try to cut something? And it was a big deal to do that on film because you had to splice that, and if you made mistakes, those splices stayed in the film the entire time. But still, and I went to Kat, and I just was like, and I've done this with all my assistants before, I was like, do you want to cut a scene? And Kat's like, yeah, sure. And so I was happy to give it to her. Now, the difference is if you're an assistant and you're being forced to cut scenes as part of your job, and you're being required by the producers or the director or your editor, that, you're threatened that you're not going to be able to work if you don't cut these scenes or these recaps, then that's a problem. Or they want to work with you on doing changes. But the learning experience is what's important. And then Kat gets to present that to the Duffers, and she did that on season 1, and she did great work. Kat is an editor, so working as an assistant right now. So that was the opportunity to get her bumped up for season 2 on episode 7, because we needed another editor to do that odd episode, because it was 4 and 4, and we had this, this 9th episode.
Yeah, and Kevin was always really good about, like, Kat cut this, ask her. He was really great. So that's how I transitioned.
Yeah, and I think the Duffers have, Kat and I are both examples because we were both the assistants last year, and for me it worked out where Dean, who was the editor for season 1, he had to go and do a feature, and I was in the room with the guys.
Got to go do a feature.
Yeah, and same thing. I had done some scenes for episode 1 here and there that the brothers and I had kind of worked on, so I had built up a rapport with them, and I just kind of it was getting ready to go to be done with season 1, and I'm like, so you guys need an editor for season 2? And I'm like, I was like, I'll be a little bit of a discount from Dean, so come on. And and then I kind of stuck with it, and I just called them up in the mid-season. I said, like, I'm serious, like, I really do want to do it. And they said, we want you, and and then it was kind of taking the most of that opportunity. And once I got there, to just try to do my best, and then the same thing, as far as giving opportunities to Casey, it's like, it was his first go around, but I was always trying to feed him stuff and being like, this is how you do it, because I'm on the same bandwagon as Kevin. It's like, we all want to be in that creative, we want to be able to contribute creatively to the process and to the show, and Casey did such a great job with sound effects and everything else that you got to feed him the stuff.
So you were pretty bold. You were like, hey.
Maybe, yeah.
Thank you.
You have to take the initiative.
I'll say one of the greatest things about Nat is he always said from day one, if you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask. And I think that was a helpful lesson to learn. You know, there'd be times where I'd get stuck on something, or I wouldn't want it to seem like I didn't know how to do things, but really the best way to do it is just cut to the chase and talk to the people that do, and you'll be better for it.
Sure.
All right, next question.
Howdy. Like one of the things that blew me away is like the scope of it, and you know how much gets done in really only a year. Like it's about 8 hours, 7 hours, and so I'm just wondering about the I don't know if it's still called like footage ratio, but you know how much actually that shot gets in there, and also maybe on average if you could talk a little bit about like how many takes are done of these scenes. Are we dealing with 30 takes for a scene or 3, especially the ones where the actors are doing something like they're going as deep as you can as an actor, like totally bawling about, like some of Noah's scenes or Winona's scenes. Like, is there only one take of that, or are there actually multiple takes of them going all out 1,000% as actors? And then how you choose from something like that? Is that general?
I can't tell you the ratio anymore because once we've gone digital, like when you were on film, you kept track of today we got 30,000 feet, tomorrow we get 40,000 feet, and you just kept a running track. I can tell you Mrs. Doubtfire was 1.5 million feet of film, that type of thing, because I remember that as an assistant. Now I can't tell you how many hours we actually ended up shooting for it, but
I can tell you like how many gigs.
Yeah, we go
how many gigs. We can talk in gigs.
Well, we can calculate.
What was the average amount of dailies you got per day? Like 3 hours?
Like 3.5.
Do you shoot 2 or 3 cameras?
3, 2 or 2.
Up to 3.
Up to 3, 2 a lot of times.
2 to 3 cameras, about 3 hours a day, and they're supposed to basically cut, the amount they shot in a day should be cut in the day to keep the camera.
Yeah. Was most of it, I mean, maybe, of course, not a shot, maybe not an angle, but was most of what was written in the script in there? Or was there a lot of cut scenes?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, there were a couple of scenes that were trimmed down for time over the course of the season, but people ask, did you do a lot of reshoots and stuff? No, we never did reshoots. We basically did what was on the script, in the script pages, and that's what we got.
Yeah, you hardly omit scenes. You never really move things here and there. The scripts are very tight, and they're very good scripts, so it's kind of like you do what's on the page, and then, like, you asked about how many takes. I would say the max I ever saw was, like, 7. And that was on, like, the one that I had 7 on was episode 2, again, the party scene, where the whole this and that, walking through it, they needed to do 7 takes of that just to get the blocking correct. And then I think on 6, that was the one we used, and it was like, yeah, that's money shot. And they're like, but wait a second, there's some, like, red stuff on Nancy's sleeve here. So they had to do they just did it for safety, but we ended up just painting that out in visual effects.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Thank you.
We're cutting it real close on time, so just one quick question each, guys.
Okay. So how is your response to like the epic impact on like pop culture? Like, it's not an editing question, but like, how do you feel? Does that change the way that you edit it, or are you still just like, cutting with your gut, or is it like, oh, I have to is there like so much pressure? How is the pop culture impact as an editor?
I think it's awesome. I love it. I go on Reddit all the time. I look at the fan art. I love it. It's great.
I think the question is, has it affected how you would approach the cut?
I would say no. In that, of course, season 2, we're worried, well, what were the Duffers going to write that can top season 1? And then we were very pleased with season 2 and how it came out. They said it's going to be bigger and better and badder, and it just had all of that. It was a bigger universe. But, I think that doesn't change how we approach it. We're always dumbfounded that it became such a hit. That I have trick-or-treaters at my house dressed like 11. I'm just like, what? What are you doing?
All right, I got
That's
Michael
amazing.
breathing down my neck, guys.
Thank you.
So
Sorry.
last quick question.
So I just saw an article on Facebook about 10K shooting is going to become a thing, and you guys said you guys shot in
8K.
8K and delivered in 6K. What are your thoughts, and how did that really, did it hurt or hinder your ability to edit by having all that extra space? But it was a lot of footage to deal with. You're going to need a lot of
Yeah. I don't think it affects how we edit or what what it is. I mean, we get the material, we cut it, with the image we see on our screens. So if it's 4K, 6K, 8K, doesn't matter. It's that the quality's better, and you can see pores in the skin now that you couldn't see before. But we're going to put a film grain finish on it anyway, so it looks more like an 80s film.
It does help a lot though with like certain, because you can just blow up so much. There's one shot in 4 when I'm on a close up on 11, and that's a wide shot. And it's just like I was like, can I do this? And I'm like, yes. And I do it. Oh, okay. And then I called up the DI guy. I'm like, dude, can I go in 80%? He's like, yeah, go ahead. I'm like, okay.
All
and
right.
then it's a close up now.
That's all we have time for questions. I have one last question for you guys. I gave it to you as a homework assignment, 30 seconds or less. What is something that you learned from working on the show that you will take with you as you continue your career?
Which way? Let's start here.
Yes.
Well, Casey and I, we talked about this today. We came up with the same idea, and it is that the crew that we work with was like a family, and it really was. And when we had visual effects in our home, because we had an edit house, a 2-story house that we had all these rooms, we had like 21 people in that house at one point, all sitting around a communal kitchen, having lunch every day. And it was the experience of not having territorial type of editing teams, and we really worked all well together. And I think that's the most important thing you can look for, in that just enjoy your time and make the experience, if you're on a big crew, something that you're going to want to hang out with these people.
All right, Nat.
I think just having confidence in the decisions you're making, whether so that you can stand on it and present your ideas and say like this is what I like, this is what I did, and like I like it. And if they like it, it's great. But if they don't, then you just say okay, well I put it out there, and just have the confidence in that. And then if not, then you have the capability and the ability to kind of just be like okay, well let's maybe that didn't work for you, but like you guys tell me what you want, so you can get that collaborative tone and put out what you want, but then also have the understanding and the ability to make it work with what the vision of the directors is.
All right, Kat?
I learned how hard it is to be an editor and how much pressure you are actually under, and having to answer to the executives, and being confident, like you said, with your choice that you made. Like I think this looks good, and I'm ready to present this. That was a learning experience for me.
All right, Casey?
And then lastly, I kind of mentioned it before, but the asking questions part and kind of reaching out to everyone that you have, around you, being sandwiched in between Nat and Kat was a huge benefit for me. And then being right across the hallway from the VFX team, learning from them, that's stuff that I'm taking with me to my show now about, naming conventions and EDLs for visual effects and pulling shots like that. So I think it's just a huge benefit to keep asking questions and keep learning along the way.
All right, and with that, that is the Stranger Things 2 editorial team. We got Kevin, Nat, Kat, and Casey.